Hello people, welcome back. I'm Jedi Guy 4, and this is the entire Zelda timeline in 5 minutes, probably. Three goddesses decide to create Hyrule, then they leave with the Golden Triforce, which is a triangle that can grant any wish and pretty much shape reality. Yeah, they decide to leave this in the hands of humans, because that's a great idea, and that's pretty much all the creation of Hyrule. These golden triangles represented three things: power, wisdom, and courage. These stood for the three golden people who created Hyrule. Once they left Hyrule, they entrusted these triangles to the goddess Hylia, who is kind of just like the keeper of the Triforce. However, she didn't manage to keep it safe for very long. And before you know it, people wanted the Triforce. They wanted the ultimate source of power in Hyrule that could do anything and grant any wish in all reality. So eventually evil forces came up. The goddess had to do something about it. She sent all the humans into the sky and sent the Triforce along with it. Since only humans can wield the Triforce, she decided to turn herself into a human, and then Hylia became Zelda, which is the human incarnation of the goddess. But yeah, she starts having visions, forgets everything about her past, including that she was the goddess, and then gets knocked out by a tornado and falls to the ground. After this, Link claims the Master Sword, which is a sword created by Hylia to seal anything that's evil or dark. So it's also known as the Sword of Evil's Bane, or the sword that seals the darkness. It's pretty much the ultimate weapon. Anyway, in the end, he ends up defeating Demise, but with a dying breath, Demise curses all three of them, Zelda, Link, and Demise, to be eternally bound in a cycle of good versus evil. And that is where we get the Legend of Zelda timeline from. Now, the timeline has split many times before, and there's a lot of controversy and debate up for what actually goes where, but this is what we've made so far. Skyward Sword is first, talks about the creation of Hyrule. I literally just went over that with you, but it's fine. Next, we have Disappointment number 1, which is Minish Cap. It has nothing to do with the storyline. Please ignore it. Next up, we have Disappointment number 2, which is the sequel to Disappointment number 1, and it also does nothing for storyline. So yeah, skip that. And here we get to the good stuff. Ocarina of Time. Honestly, one of my favorite Zelda games, aside from Breath of the Wild and stuff like that. But, yeah, it's pretty much the basis of the Zelda series, aside from Skyward Sword. This game is pretty well known for being the infamous time split and the first 3D Zelda game. Anyway, so here's what happened. If Link defeats Ganondorf, which is the reincarnation of Demise in this game, then Hyrule has two choices. Choice number 1. Link stays in his current timeline, where he gets to not have a childhood ever, and he just lives his life as an old man, which eventually somehow leads to the flooding of the world, because once Ganondorf is sealed, he eventually breaks out of the Sacred Realm, and then the three golden goddesses that I mentioned much earlier in the video, they decide to flood Hyrule in efforts to make Hyrule good again, without Ganondorf's evil power. Choice number 2. Link goes back to live his childhood, and since Navi, his fairy/best friend, had fulfilled her purpose, she decided to not exist anymore. And this leads Link into a deep depression, and also the Majora's Mask timeline. And the Twilight timeline. That's pretty much all there is to that. Last, but certainly not least, we have the Defeat timeline. This timeline, contrary to what you might think, is actually quite uplifting compared to the others. This is also known as the Classic timeline, where pretty much anything that happened before the 2000s occurred. This is like Link's Awakening, A Link to the Past, A Link Between Worlds, pretty much anything like that. And if we're following the complex timeline, this also branches out into the comic and meme timeline, where we try to make shows and comics canon, even though it's kind of hard to do that. Anyway, eventually all these timelines converge into the Breath of the Wild timeline, where nothing really matters from the past, and Link has fallen asleep for 100 years, only to be awakened and to kill Ganon. And that got more complicated with Hyrule Warriors, where there's now another timeline split, because someone thought it would be a good idea to time travel to solve everyone's problems, again. One last thing that I kind of sort of forgot to mention, Breath of the Wild 2 also takes place after Breath of the Wild, which is in the standard timeline. And also, Link holds the Triforce of Courage, Ganon holds the Triforce of Power, and Zelda holds the Triforce of Wisdom. And that is exactly 5 minutes.